The quiet hush of the National Portrait Gallery shattered in an instant. "Get on the ground now!" A security guard shouted, his voice echoing across the marble floor. Visitors froze mid-step. A group of schoolchildren gasped. A man, clearly homeless with tattered clothes and wild silver hair, stood motionless in front of a large portrait. His eyes were locked onto it, unblinking. He raised one trembling hand as if trying to touch the glass. "I have to protect her," he mumbled. Then chaos erupted. Two guards tackled him from behind, forcing him to the ground. He didn't fight back. He didn't even flinch. His voice, calm and distant, kept repeating, "She's in danger. They're coming." Phones were out. People were recording. A woman whispered, "Is he on something?" Another muttered, "Why that painting?" The portrait he reached for was of a woman in military uniform, nameplate blank. No biography beside it, just the face of a forgotten ghost. As police sirens wailed in the distance, no one had any idea the man being arrested had once vanished from history because someone powerful wanted him gone. At the precinct, officers processed the man like any other vagrant. No ID, no wallet, just an old faded photo stuffed in his coat pocket, a woman in uniform standing next to a much younger version of him, both smiling under a flagpole. The photo was worn at the edges like it had been folded and unfolded 1,000 times. Detective Lisa Harmon squinted at the image. "Where'd you get this, sir?" The man didn't answer. He stared at the table, lips pressed tight. His fingers cracked and dirt-lined, tapped nervously in a rhythm, almost like Morse code. A junior officer ran his fingerprints. Nothing came up. No criminal record, no military file, not even a driver's license. "Guy's a ghost," the tech mumbled. Lisa leaned in. "What's your name?" He finally spoke, his voice low and gravelly. "They called me Jack. Jack something, I can't remember." Then he looked up at her, eyes piercing. "She was my partner, my sister. She died, and they covered it up." Lisa blinked. "Who covered it up?" Jack shook his head, eyes suddenly wide. "They're still watching, even now. They'll come for me, too." To everyone in that room, he was just another unstable man off the streets. But something about his calm intensity, his conviction, dug under Lisa's skin. She didn't know it yet, but this man wasn't crazy. He was buried. Back at the museum, the security office buzzed with quiet tension. Frank Delgado, the night supervisor, reviewed the footage again the moment Jack slipped past the velvet rope and approached the display. But it wasn't random. Jack moved with purpose, heading straight for the glass case, holding the 1965 Medal of Valor and an old service pistol engraved with the initials EMB. Frank paused the video. Why didn't he take anything? The museum director, Dr. Carla Monroe, shook her head. Maybe he wasn't here to steal. Maybe he came to remember. Frank picked up the phone and called Homeland Security, reporting the breach. "We had an intruder at the Veterans Memorial exhibit. Didn't damage anything, but he went straight for a classified donation, military origin." The call was transferred. Minutes later, a deep voice crackled through the line. "This is Agent Thomas Ryland, Secret Service. Describe the man." Frank relayed what he could. There was a pause, then the voice stiffened. "Secure all footage. Do not share this with anyone." "I'm on my way," Frank frowned. "Is he dangerous?" The agent hesitated. "If that's who I think it is, he used to guard presidents." Jack sat hunched over the cold metal table, his hands cuffed, wrists red. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed above, casting long shadows on the white walls. Two local officers stood behind the glass, watching silently as Agent Thomas Ryland entered the room. His suit was sharp, his badge gleaming. Ryland set a folder on the table, but didn't open it. "You're not a thief," he said calmly, eyes fixed on Jack. "But you're not just some drifter either." Jack didn't answer. Ryland leaned in slightly. "That medal in the case, it belonged to Colonel Elijah M. Briggs, one of the most decorated men in the history of the Army." Jack's eyes flicked up just for a second. Ryland continued, softer now. "We thought he died in Kabul 12 years ago." No body recovered, just a closed casket and a mountain of classified paperwork. Still silence. Ryland finally opened the folder. Inside, an old black and white photo. A younger Elijah Briggs in uniform. Next to him, Ryland himself, a fresh-faced rookie in dress blues. "You trained me," Ryland said quietly. "You were my CO. So tell me, Colonel, why the hell are you sleeping on a bench in D.C.?" Jack swallowed hard. For the first time he spoke. Because the country I served forgot I existed. The room grew heavy with the weight of Jack's words, though they were few. Agent Ryland sat back in his chair, staring at the man in front of him, the once proud Colonel Elijah M. Briggs, a name lost to time and buried beneath layers of government bureaucracy. Jack's voice broke the silence again, this time quieter, almost reflective. Elijah. Briggs doesn't exist anymore, not in the records, not in the minds of those who owe their lives to him. He looked up, eyes distant. You see, when you vanish, you're forgotten, but you still have a job to do. Ryland ran a hand over his face. But why all this? Why come to the museum? Why pretend to be someone else? Jack's gaze softened. Because some of us don't get a funeral. Some of us don't get a proper thank you. You might call it pride or resentment, but I call it the last mission. For the first time, Ryland felt the full weight of the silence between them. The man sitting in front of him wasn't just a forgotten soldier. He was a hero, lost in the cracks of a system that moved on while he remained frozen in time. You taught me everything I know, Ryland said quietly, more to himself than to Jack. But I never thought I'd be the one to find you. The door to the interrogation room swung open with a creak, and Agent Monroe stepped in. His crisp black suit and dark sunglasses seemed almost too sharp for the setting, the bright fluorescent lights above flickering as if to remind everyone of the gravity of the moment. Monroe wasn't just any agent, he was a veteran of the Secret Service, one of the few who had worked directly under the president's protection. Monroe's eyes immediately locked onto Jack, and for the briefest second, there was a flash of recognition in his gaze. He stepped forward, his expression neutral, but calculating, like someone who had seen 1,000 faces, but never forgot a single one. Agent Ryland Monroe said, his voice calm but firm. I understand you've found someone who's been missing for a very long time. Ryland nodded, still processing the strange familiarity between the two men. Monroe had never been one to waste words, but his presence alone spoke volumes. Monroe's gaze turned to Jack. Colonel Briggs, he said, the name heavy in the air. We need to talk. There's a lot to discuss, a lot more than you think. The tension in the room shifted as Monroe took a seat, his posture almost military. Jack remained still, as if waiting for something or someone that had been long overdue. The room fell into a heavy silence as Agent Monroe's words hung in the air. Jack's face remained impassive, but something in his eyes shifted. The recognition was mutual now. Agent Monroe knew exactly who he was, and Jack could feel the weight of his presence, a man who understood what it meant to be more than just a name. Sir, you need to come with me. Monroe said, his tone not leaving room for argument. The words were simple, but they carried the command of someone who had walked through fire and came out unscathed. Jack's mind raced, but his body stayed still. He didn't ask any questions, didn't protest. The calm of someone who had been through much worse than a few questions in a stark, cold room. Let's go, Monroe said, signaling to the officers who had been standing in the back of the room, watching the exchange with growing confusion. They all knew something had changed. The man they had dismissed as just another homeless person was now someone different, someone important. Monroe turned on his heel, and without another word, Jack followed. The metal door swung open, and the sounds of the station faded behind them, replaced by the sound of footsteps on the concrete floor. The mystery of Jack's past was about to unfold. The sterile white lights of the interrogation room flickered in Jack's mind, but his thoughts drifted far away to a time long ago. He closed his eyes, and suddenly he was no longer in a cramped police station. The stifling air, the low hum of modern technology, all faded into the background, as he was transported to a dusty desert landscape where the only sound was the wind and the distant echoes of military boots crunching through sand. It was 2003. Jack was known by a different name than Captain Jack Roberts, and he was part of one of the most covert and dangerous operations the United States had ever conducted, Operation Iron Echo. It was a mission so secret its details had been buried in the deepest levels of the Pentagon, classified for decades. But Jack had been there in the heart of it when the fate of a dozen Allied soldiers hung in the balance. The mission was supposed to be a routine extraction, a clean operation to pull out a team stranded in enemy territory. But things had gone wrong, spectacularly wrong. They were ambushed by insurgents outnumbered and outgunned. The mission's commander, Lieutenant Colonel Edward McHale, was gravely injured in the initial blast. Jack had made a split-second decision. He took command, knowing the operation was now on his shoulders. They had to get out, no matter the cost. Using all of his experience, Jack orchestrated a daring escape, cutting through enemy lines under the cover of darkness. The soldiers fought through brutal conditions, their backs to the wall, the enemy closing in fast. They lost men, but they made it out alive. Jack's mind still lingered on the faces of the men who didn't make it. He had carried the weight of their sacrifice with him every day since. The operation had earned him a Distinguished Service Cross, but he'd never felt the honor. It had been his job to survive, to lead, to bring them home, no matter the cost. The scars from that mission weren't just physical. They were buried deeper in the places Jack didn't let anyone see. In the quiet of the interrogation room, Jack's fingers tightened into fists, his mind pulling back from the memory. He hadn't thought of Iron Echo in years, but Monroe had just brought him back to the present and back into a life he thought he had left behind. As the flashback faded and reality came crashing back, Jack's chest tightened. His mind flickered between the past and present, a place where he no longer belonged. The system that had once held him up, supported him, and given him purpose had crumbled piece by piece beneath his feet. The government had long since turned its back on soldiers like him, heroes without medals, warriors forgotten by the very system they had fought to protect. After Operation Iron, Echo Jack was hailed as a hero. At least that was the official story. The truth was far more complicated. As the years passed, he was slowly erased from the records, his name removed from military lists, his service forgotten. His Distinguished Service Cross was buried in a drawer, somewhere a relic of a life he no longer had. The system had no place for men like Jack when their usefulness had expired. His every move was scrutinized, his efforts overshadowed by new younger soldiers who were easier to control. Jack had been one of the best until he wasn't. And when the orders came that he was no longer needed, he disappeared. It wasn't just the military that had abandoned him. He had no family left, no friends he could trust. The world had changed, and Jack found himself on the streets living a life he could barely recognize. It was as if the man who had commanded troops who had made life and death decisions in the blink of an eye had vanished into thin air, replaced by a nameless homeless man struggling to survive. As the officers in the room looked at him unaware of his past, Jack knew this moment was his last chance to set the record straight. But was he ready to confront the man he had become? Could he reconcile the soldier he once was with the man they had arrested today? The tension in the interrogation room hung thick like the calm before a storm. The officers exchanged uneasy glances as Agent Monroe's voice pierced the silence steady and firm. "We need confirmation that he's the man we think he is," one of them murmured, glancing at his partner. Monroe didn't flinch. "That's not a problem," Agent Monroe replied coldly, pulling out a small, sleek device from his jacket. He punched in a few numbers, his fingers precise, almost mechanical. The room seemed to shrink as everyone waited, the air electric with anticipation. A voice crackled through the intercom a few seconds later. Sharp and clipped, "Confirmed Jack Iron Miller, U.S. Army Retired Special Forces Operation, Iron Echo, Medal of Honor, recipient. Unauthorized withdrawal from the system. He's one of ours." The officers' faces paled. Jack's expression remained unchanged. His past long buried in shadows was suddenly dragged into the light. Agent Monroe looked up at the officers, his gaze unwavering. "You've just arrested a man who saved countless lives. This isn't some homeless man off the street. This is someone we should have been protecting." As the confirmation settled over them, like a cold weight, the officers couldn't help but feel the enormity of the situation. They had no idea who they were really dealing with, and now it was too late to undo their mistake. A heavy silence filled the room after the confirmation. The officers stood frozen, grappling with the reality that the homeless man they had just arrested was none other than Jack Iron Miller, a legend in the Special Forces. The weight of their ignorance pressed down on them. Monroe's eyes never left Jack, who remained calm, the stoic mask of a man who had seen too much to be rattled by this new wave of attention. "You should have known," Monroe said, his voice carrying an edge of frustration. "This man was a hero long before you ever thought about issuing him a ticket." Jack didn't respond. His silence wasn't one of submission, but of acceptance. He had been through this before. He knew that sometimes the truth didn't come until it was far too late to change things. The officers fidgeted, their previous bravado deflating. One of them cleared his throat. "We didn't know. We didn't have a clue." Monroe's eyes narrowed. "That's the point. You never know who someone really is until you bother to look. This man didn't want your respect. He didn't need it. But now you have no choice but to recognize it." As the truth of Jack's past resurfaced, the officers realized that they had not just misjudged a person, but failed to see the deeper layers of sacrifice, service, and honor that lay beneath the surface. Jack's life was more than the rough exterior they had so carelessly dismissed. The news broke the next morning like wildfire, spreading across the nation. Headlines flashed on screens the image of Jack, Iron Miller, scruffy and worn, paired with the startling revelation of his true identity. The press went into a frenzy, calling it a shocking fall from grace one of their own. The homeless vet had once been a celebrated war hero. Television anchors scrambled to cover the story interviews, with experts flooding airwaves speculating how such a decorated soldier had ended up on the streets. The public's reaction was split. Some saw it as a tragic injustice, a hero lost to the system, abandoned by those he served. Others criticized him for not seeking help sooner, for not stepping forward when the government owed him so much. Jack, however, remained silent. He had no desire to speak publicly about the pain of his past. The storm raged on outside, but inside he was already accustomed to being overlooked. For Jack, this was just another chapter in a life of shadows and silence. The story of Jack Iron Miller quickly became a nationwide sensation. News outlets ran endless reports offering deeper dives into his military history, his years of service, and his sudden disappearance from the public eye. Social media exploded with discussions, with some rallying behind him, calling for justice and support for veterans like him, while others questioned how the system could have failed someone who had once been a national hero. Veterans organizations began to speak out, calling attention to the gap in care for those who served. Donations poured in, some directed to help Jack, others to support veteran-related charities. The story wasn't just about Jack anymore. It had sparked a larger conversation about how the country treats its heroes once they've come home. The fallout from Jack Miller's story didn't just fade away, it opened doors to a new life for him. As national attention continued to grow, the government began to take action. A special task force was set up to help veterans who had been lost in the cracks of the system, ensuring they received the care and recognition they deserved. Jack, now recognized as a hero, once again became the face of that change. With his history and service finally validated, Jack moved into a new home, a modest place outside of the city where he could rebuild. It wasn't much, but it was his, and for the first time in years, he felt at peace. His old friends from the service came to visit, some of them even helping him restore parts of his home. The community that had once forgotten him was now eager to support him. Jack also began to speak at veterans' events, sharing his story with others who had fallen through the same cracks he had. While the past would always haunt him, Jack finally had a chance to find the life he deserved, a life of respect, dignity, and most importantly, peace. Jack Miller's story became more than just a tale of survival. It became a legacy of resilience. His journey from a forgotten homeless man to a national hero inspired countless others. He wasn't just a name on a list anymore. He was a symbol of the strength veterans possessed even when the world seemed to abandon them. His story sparked reforms within the government, ensuring that future generations of soldiers would never be lost in the system again. As Jack spoke at various events, he shared more than just his past. He shared the hope that one day no one would have to face what he did. His legacy wasn't in the medals or accolades, but in the lives he touched, proving that even the most broken can rise again, leaving a mark that can never be erased.